Give me 2 seconds, and we should be up and running. Okay.
Okay, well, I'd like to welcome you all. Thank you so much for coming. I'm rather surprised that we have this many folks that are on, and I commend you for coming in this strange time we're living in. Right now, a lot of people are feeling apathetic or depressed and having trouble carrying on, and especially so shortly after the society increased the length of time that we're going to have between now and when we can visit in person. A lot of people really gave up at that point. But I'm, like I said earlier, I really see this as our opportunity, especially as Seneschals, to try to get our office in order. There's been a lot of things, I think, that in various groups, we've been kind of just doing things as quickly and as effectively and efficiently as we could at the time. But now that we have this, hopefully, a little bit of a breather, we can kind of modernize and grow as a society to make things a little bit better for people as we play and as we move into the future. Um, but that's pretty much my big soapbox. I really wanted to keep today as an open discussion. I know we have Seneschals with various levels of experience. We have some people on, which I'm very excited about, that aren't even Seneschals and just want to learn about the Seneschal job. I think that's great. Um, we need volunteers. At the kingdom level, we have a ton of volunteer positions that are open. And, a lot of people have been doing jobs for many, many years and they're getting tired. So um, we really are looking for new people, new blood, volunteers. And we kind of, Seneschals are kind of the facilitators of the fun in some ways. So if we can find ways to make our jobs a little easier, so maybe we can find some breathing time to talk to folks. And I think that interpersonal connection is really what will make or break the job of Seneschal. Are there any questions that we have right off the bat, or um, do we need to talk more basics? Okay. So, my basic spiel, and for those of you who have been Seneschals for a while, please forgive me. This is in handbooks, and hopefully you have figured this out by now. A Seneschal is really, and this is from the Society Handbook, they're the facilitator of policy. Frequently, we hear that the Seneschal is the legal representative of the group. And that is really what we do. We are supposed to be familiar with society policy, kingdom law, kingdom policy, including especially financial policy. And our job is to interpret those policies. Now, I have the memory of a leaky sieve. I really can't remember anything to save my life. So what I do is I make sure I have a copy of corpora, kingdom law, and kingdom policy on my, right now we have the neat little gadget, the cell phone. And I keep all of that right here so that I'm familiar enough with it that I can look it up on the fly. And if we have any questions or any issues arise, I can answer them. But I usually, because I do not trust my memory, go right back to the handbook. That's the first place I look before I give a call. So, as a legal representative, some people kind of wonder what's the difference and what are the different leadership roles in the kingdom. So, to just kind of give your newer folks a counter to what the seneschal is, the crown. Now, the crown is in charge of ceremony, courts, and awards. The crown may create or change law, but, and this is where the seneschal comes in, that law may not conflict with the laws or policies of the kingdom or the society, or sorry, of the society or mundane law. The other thing that the Crown can do is they monitor the performance of the kingdom level officers. So my job is to make sure the local officers are reporting. And to that effect, I have deputies such as the Southern Deputy, Mistress Melodia, and the Northern Deputy, Master Jethro. And they help me keep track of whether or not the seneschals are reporting, when their warrants are due to expire, and whether or not we've advertised their position. That's important because if a seneschal does not report for 3 months in a row, that is grounds for expulsion to the position. Now, depending on your circumstances, we may or may not ask you to leave the position. We may give you lenience, but it's very dependent, and that is one of the rules we try to stick to. So are there any questions about that? No? Okay. All right, so then the other big issue that I have felt as a seneschal is hard to figure out is what to do when there is an emergency or when there is something is brought to your attention. Now, if it is somebody severely injured, or if there is something that has illegal that has happened, first and foremost, please call EMS or call the police. Mundane authority is really the authority. And if you're in a mundanely serious situation, really contact those mundane authorities right away. And you might think that doesn't need to be said, but I have been to many events in the society where we have had emergencies, medical emergencies even, and people are reticent for some reason to call the mundane EMS. They'll call the chirurgeon, but sometimes those chirurgeons don't have the medical licenses to treat certain situations. So get the help you need first and foremost. Now, in certain situations, people ask, well, what happens to the victim? Well, encourage, like if it's not a medical emergency, you encourage the victim to go to the mundane authorities first and foremost. And then once you've dealt with making sure that your mundane bases are covered, then please report any incidents up the chain. Report it first to the deputies who will report it to me, and then I will be reporting that to the society seneschal. And in the instance of crime or other more serious mundane issues, please remember that SCA volunteers do not investigate criminal acts. We're not an investigatory group. And also, because I have seen this done, and I feel like this is where we can get in trouble. Make sure we are not to interview alleged victims. If we have a very serious issue, any alleged victims really need to go to mundane authority, and the mundane authority will take it from there. So that's some of the more serious things that I have seen happen. Do we have any questions?
Do we have any legal liabilities that we need to worry about as a seneschal in cases of crime like that?
Can you clarify that question?
Could we be personally sued because we didn't handle something?
Well, as long as you act within the authorities designated to you in the corpora and the society or the seneschal documents, no. However, those are very limited. Really, it needs to be referred, any serious incidents, say, God forbid, a rape, or God forbid, somebody gets seriously injured, it needs to report it to the legal authorities, mundane authorities. A theft needs to be reported to the legal authorities. And as long as you do report that, then no, you're not liable.
Quick question. Is there a place where we can go to get the list of people who have passed background checks or working with children?
Yes, there is. Actually, it's not posted, I believe, anywhere. But at Seneschall's, we get that report from the BOD, and I've been trying to make sure that goes out with your roster waiver, your rosters. So if you're not receiving rosters, please let me know, and we need to get you on that list.
Okay. I am getting the rosters. I just didn't see the
It was a tab in the middle of this spreadsheet.
tab in the middle. That's why I
That's
didn't
the
see
same.
it. Thank you.
I noticed this last month that it was one of the tabs.
Luckily, we haven't had any reason to worry about it, but you know, for future reference.
Right. I mean, this is all stuff you really, God forbid, you never have to deal with. The majority of stuff you have to deal with for your newer Seneschals is stuff like interpersonal problems. You know, Baron so-and-so was in a bad mood and he was cranky and he hollered at newbie such and such, and feelings are hurt and people are feeling harassed and bullied, and they may or may not have a legitimate complaint. And that's where you come in, is you need to determine is, you know, first of all, if they feel like they have a legitimate complaint, you need to ask them to follow the grievance process, which is outlined in corpora. It's very, very simple. You know, they write a letter to the person that they're feeling aggrieved by, and then that letter gets sent to you, and they get a chance to, the person who's attacked somebody else gets to respond. And then at that point, if everybody's happy, we move on. If not, the Seneschal may be asked to mediate a discussion. And if that doesn't work and parties are not happy, they'll slowly move up the chain. So that's really, in my experience as Seneschal, the majority of stuff you have to deal with. That, and especially this time of COVID, making sure folks follow the rules. Like, we are not being allowed to have in-person activities as of this time. You all can petition Kingdom for a variance on that for a specific activity, but unless you've petitioned and if we've said yes, then you cannot be having in-person activities. And honestly, it's been hard telling fighters, hey, you can't have fighter practice.
Can you clarify what so I have some folks that are looking to do very unofficial get together and shoot archery at our local archery site. What is your expectation in terms of publishing that to the unofficial group page if that person is also an officer in the barony?
If that person is an officer, they should not be posting that anywhere. I really feel like this is unofficial. Do not post it anywhere, even unofficial sites, even though those are unofficial. If it's on your personal page, there's not a thing we can really do about it. But if you post it to any site with a name that says SCA on it, even if it's unofficial, it's kind of starting to cross that line.
That was my interpretation as well, but I said I would ask the question and get clarification. So
now with something like archery, where you can social distance, depending on where you live and what the state mundane legal rules are, we could give you a variance. But I don't know what the legal rules are where you live and right now, and you could petition if you are concerned about that. So does that bring up?
That does bring up, so Christine, I got asked to make sure, as a new Seneschal, that I had that they were asking that we have background checks done. And I do, because I had it done because they had asked all the Battlemore coordinators last year. I was actually just looking at the November list. There's only like 20 or 25 people kingdom wide that have background checks in place right now.
Which is why they're asking Seneschals.
Right.
There's so few people with background checks. And if you have a child related issue, we need to know, like say some lost child at an event, we need to know, well, what do we do with this child? Well, we can at least drop it off to the Seneschal and one other person. So we really, and that's something folks might not have heard yet, we really are asking, especially officers and Seneschals, especially the Seneschals, to please get your background checks done. And it's pretty simple. If you guys need help, I can help you, but there's a form on the society website. You fill it out, you send it in as instructed on the form, and then the society will come back to Kingdom and say, is it okay if we run the background check for this person? And most likely we'll say yes, because we're desperate for people. And they'll run the background check. The Kingdom will pay the funds for that, and you'll have your certificate.
So, and you do want us to ask any of our officers that are willing to do the same at the Baronial level?
Yes, ma'am. At this point, I believe, I was told anyway, that they've asked peers to do such, and obviously that's not happening necessarily. And maybe it's because of the drop in numbers and the inactivity, but at this time, when we resume activity, which will be in June or July, hopefully, then we will need folks who are authorized to deal with children, just to cover our bases.
Yeah, I hadn't heard the peer thing, so I'll make sure I announce that at my populace meeting next month.
So
I'll
this,
fully admit that I haven't put in my background check yet, but is it a requirement to have a background check for any kingdom level position or any seneschal? Or is it not part of the Outlands Kingdom rules?
I have not read that.
Okay.
I do not believe it's part of a higher level rule system, and I'm pretty sure it's not part of the Outlands Kingdom level rules.
Right. The only requirement for background checks is if you are doing anything with children.
Right. I mean, I've gotten away with not having a background check till now. Now, as the Kingdom Seneschal I was required. Kingdom Seneschals are required to have a background check. And we're discussing whether or not local Seneschals are going to be required to have a background check. So that's in negotiation right now. But to get out ahead of the curve, I would strongly suggest you do that.
okay, now I have a question. You say that we should have a background check because you're giving children, but I'd fall back on something you said earlier. If someone brought me a lost child, I'd give it to the police because I don't want to deal with that. I mean,
Right,
isn't that what
but
we should be
then
doing?
there's a time period between when the child is
Right.
found and when the police show up. And that still requires a background check.
Correct. So you need, anytime you're dealing with a lost child, you need two adults that are not part of the same household or family, legally related, to have a background check and be with that child.
And this is kind of a new thing, asking people like the other officers and that kind of stuff, Seneschals and whatnot, and the peers to do this. So Lewis just posted a comment that he'd never been asked. And I think that's because this is a relatively new request coming.
It is
Yeah.
new, and it's because our background check numbers have gone well, our numbers in general, and that's something else I was going to talk to you folks about, have gone down quite a lot. And, not surprisingly. And the number of folks with a background check have just gone down to, I think, was it 25? Somebody said. I believe it's something really small like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I pulled up the list, there was 20 or 25 names on the current background checklist from 1st of November.
So yes, it's distinctly a problem. If you only have 25 folks in this whole kingdom, and we have a large event, or even just a small event. If you have a little local small event and some child wanders off from their parents and their parents are off doing whatever and cannot be found, we need folks to be able to watch that child.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Do we need to periodically renew our background check? Do we need to have it done on an annual basis or less often than that? Biannual?
Yeah, they're good for 2 years. So you're
Okay.
going to have to get them biannually.
Okay.
So the background checks I get for my Lego work have to be done yearly, even though they're good for 2 years.
Well, the society isn't as strict with that.
So if you're looking to take up a position, it's about the same length of time as your warrant would generally be?
Yeah, I believe roughly it is. For the kingdom officers, their warrants can be 3 years, but for local officers, yes, generally they're 2 years and they'll be about the same warrant.
Yeah, I just looked at the expiration date on mine and it expires 2 years from when I put in got approved. So.
Any more?
About how long does it take for it to go through?
I think it depends on the urgency, but it really took, I think, 2 days for mine to go through.
I think
It
I
may
faxed mine in and got the actual like physical letter in the mail within a month. So a couple weeks.
I have the same first, middle, and last name as a sex offender, so mine usually takes longer.
Oh dear.
But he's in Florida, so.
I have to admit, I have had a number of background checks for work. And so I think that speeds it up because every time I have a background check, they seem to be faster.
That's true. I do have to often take one for work, and it did take a couple weeks for the letter to come, but the information got back to Freya much more quickly than the letter got to me.
I have to have one done every 3 years for work. So.
So I just looked up the link for the background check authorization, and you can email them. There's a thing at the bottom of the first page to submit by email too. So you could fill it out, scan it back in. And so
Yes.
I had to do it, 2016 when I was still living in Palantir because I was becoming the social media officer for the kingdom. And I was like, you gotta do this. I'm like, okay. So
well, I have to admit, dirty little secret, I don't even own a printer. And so to get my background check done, I downloaded it as a PDF and I digitally signed it and I digitally sent it in and there was no paper involved. Oh, which is another thing I wanted to bring up with the Seneschallate group. I really think we need to go more digital with some of our records. I don't know if locally you guys are keeping reams of paper, but in my garage, I have buckets and buckets and buckets of reports from Drigistan. Thank God I don't have any from Dracamore anymore, but I still have some, Freya sent me like 3 huge tubs of files, and I honestly will probably never go through them unless we have an emergency and I absolutely need to. So I firmly believe in keeping digital records. If you guys can, I keep my digital records filed in on my computer, but I also keep them on Dropbox where it gets backed up. And kingdom officers, I don't know if local officers have access to a Google account, but the kingdom officers anyway all have a Google account that we can save our records to and filed appropriately. Then that allows you to find stuff a lot quicker.
Yeah, the problem with digital records is nobody knows how to preserve, most people don't know how to preserve them. They're lost so easily. If anything happens and nobody knows your Dropbox, they'll never be found again. If something happens to your computer and your Dropbox, they're gone. The kingdom, the corporate really has to establish some way to keep these for us that has some kind of corporate memory and preservation.
Well,
Relying
also
on it to
remember
roll
that
out across individual people is just going to be a loss.
Yeah,
also
that's
remember
why
that
having like a
corporate-
Google Drive can help that is shared with multiple people.
Right.
So always have at least one other person who can access everything. And then,
But that should all be coordinated by corporate. I mean, corporate really is the point of contact, the point of stability in the SCA. They are the forever. They know how to keep
Remember
the
though
record.
that
They can
corporate
tell
also
us.
has a document retention policy
Right.
that most documents really need to be destroyed after about 7 years.
Right.
So, when I was Kingdom Herald, I inherited a wall full of file boxes with every submission going back to when we were a principality.
Oh dear.
And I used my office's funds to buy a scanner, and we digitized everything. And we sent a copy to society, and everything else is on a little 1 gigabyte external hard drive that's properly labeled and passed around between the records holders for the office. There's 3 of them, and they're all synced up and backed up, and off they go. Those records are such that you need to keep them to figure out what's registered, why it was not registered, things like that, because that could come up at any time. But for the Seneschal's documents, most of what we've got is like site contracts and things like that, which are essentially useless after a couple of years. I mean, you might want to go back and reference them for the terms that we got at this really cool site a few years ago, but that's something that you can easily put into a spreadsheet or something and have one document that instead of boxes and boxes of files.
And I have to second that. I mean, I work for the government, and we deal with lots and lots of files, and everything has a records retention policy. In the SCA, generally that is 7 years. And I highly recommend going through those boxes and boxes of papers. I did that for Drigistan when I was the Drigistan Seneschal. I found some of the coolest stuff. I found old newspaper articles, old poems that the Tinkers had written 20 years ago. Some of that stuff you might want to keep for posterity, or you might scan it so you can share it so people can see some of this old stuff. But other than that, if it's older than 7 years, you may want to consider scanning it if you really want to retain it. But carrying around boxes and boxes of totes of paper is just a little absurd to me.
yeah, I think the biggest paperwork thing that we have is the waivers.
Correct. And to that effect, Baroness Diana, do you want to introduce yourself? She has graciously volunteered to be the Kingdom Waiver Deputy. We have not had a Kingdom Waiver Deputy for a long time. I'm thinking like 5 to 6, maybe longer years.
I volunteer.
Because I have a huge stack of them at this point as MOL.
At this point, folks, if they're 7 years old or younger, you have those records somewhere, please scan them and get them to Diana, and she's going to keep those records.
Does everybody know me?
No,
This thing doesn't show my picture.
No, not everyone knows you.
Oh, I was sure everybody did. I'm going to turn on my camera and see what happens. Oh, yes,
There
dear.
we go. We can see your
Ooh.
screen. We don't see you. There
There
we
she
go.
is.
Now we see you. Thank you.
I'm not in garb. Do you want me to go get my hat?
Oh, no. Be comfortable if that's what you want to do.
Daniel's
So-
cooking breakfast, so you know it's a thing.
So yes, we do now finally have a Kingdom Waiver deputy. We've long needed one. And I know in Dracomore, I think I have some of your records that are like 6 years. I kept those waivers, so I'll get them in. But anyway,
Under whose office is this? So would it be under the Seneschallate or the
Yes.
waiver deputy? Okay.
Kingdom Waiver deputy is a deputy of the Seneschallate. And
Okay.
yeah.
So we can find it on the webpage
Yes.
once it's uploaded.
And I believe Carlos may set up a email for her. So I believe it's ready to go and linked and
Yeah, I was just about to ask is how do we want to send, what's the mechanism for sending them in? So
right.
attaching to an email, or is there a submission place?
Attach them to the email on on that email, the Kingdom Waiver Deputy email.
And after we send these to Baroness Diana, do we need to retain them?
The paper copies,
Yes.
if they're younger than 7 years, I would consider keeping. I need to look that up. I need to look up the retention policy. Personally, I'm not sure on that. So let me look that up.
Thank you.
We haven't had a waiver deputy in so long. I have waivers for
Well,
probably
Christine,
a decade. Yes, ma'am.
I would think that once I get them, review them, make sure that I have them, then there wouldn't be a need to keep the paper.
I don't think there is a need, but just in case there is, I want to make sure I want to check with corporate because those signatures on that paper are actually a thing.
Well, it's a wet signature on a piece of paper. So if it went to court, being a lawyer, I would have to say, I want the paper.
Right. And
So
so signatures are a thing that I am not 100% sure how we officially deal with them. So I really.
Under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, electronic signatures are perfectly valid and accepted by courts of law. In
Right.
fact, no state court in Colorado actually accepts paper pleadings anymore. Everything is submitted digitally.
As it is in New Mexico.
Yeah, so, you know, a PDF of a signed document is just fine.
Okay, I wasn't so sure about that. I know with the federal government, a PDF of a signed document is fine. I assumed it was similar,
Yeah.
but you know.
So that is 7 years and under. Everything that is past that we don't need to retain. I think Carita has about 30 years worth.
I would suggest shredding.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Unless you want them for some reason, like historically, look who went to this event. As a historical record, maybe it would be worth keeping. I don't know.
Yeah. And there are companies that will drive a truck up to your house and, you know, just take all your boxes, dump them in and shred them. Which is very, very nice because you will burn out paper shredders with that many documents.
Some banks will even do it
We have
for
a
you.
fireplace. Can we just burn them?
Sure.
Make a nice campfire.
So Carita has about 30 years worth of all kinds of records on paper, in storage, in filing cabinets, which we were planning on tackling last year, right when the quarantine started.
Well, that's why the retention policy is like my favorite thing to talk about. I talk about it at work all the time because there's something satisfying. I mean, you never want to get rid of stuff like historical records or data or, you know, some poem written by somebody 20 years ago. If that has an emotional attachment, probably shouldn't be destroyed. But, you know, old contracts that aren't legally, you know, worth anything anymore, or, you know, old papers, signatures on a sheet of paper, unless it has some significance.
That would be our issue, is that they're not separated in such a way that you could just pull a folder of those things. They're folders full of years worth of information that aren't divided by any kind of category.
Yeah.
Christine, I'd like to make a comment here. When
What-
I was Seneschal here in Alberon for 4 years or whatever it was, I did actually message and investigate what to do with all of the historical documents. There's like 3 or 4 tubs of them that are in the keep because I didn't want to keep them at my house. Anyway, one of the things that I did, I contacted companies here in Albuquerque. What would it take to hire a company to put all that stuff on like microfiche, or to download it somehow and put it on a jump drive, something where we could look it up, you know, with Control F and find out what it is we wanted to know. The number I was given at the time, the cost, was, in my opinion, astronomical. It was in excess of $3,000.
Well, and that's the
So-
thing. So that's where we need volunteer, you know, this is a volunteer organization, everything gets done voluntarily. If you are sick of carrying around totes of stuff that's older than 7 years, you can get rid of that. But you're gonna have to probably sort through it. And that's the tough thing.
Yeah, it was way too time consuming for me. I read through a lot of them, took me almost 7 months, you know, and some of the historical information was lots of fun. And then I had a volunteer who went through all of the newsletters and got that all organized and
Right.
did a report. Well, still, you know, that's in tubs. It's nobody's looking at it.
Right. So it's really up to you. But I highly recommend trying to get those recorded digitally and getting rid of them.
Okay, I have a question now.
Yes.
So we've talked about these records we don't need to keep, cool historical records we should keep, and St. Goliath has a lot of those. The other things you're talking about, contracts and waivers, I don't know of any that I have. We have lists. I see people filling them out. I don't know where they go. I don't know who does anything with them. I don't know what happens to them.
Lists of
Fighters. Like when we have our tournament, the fighters come. The person who runs the list is usually from outside of Goliath. I don't think, I mean, I've only run one event as Seneschal, and I've spent it mostly in the hospital. But I'm not aware of in our records any of these waivers for people who participated in the lists. My suspicion is the list person from Alberon or whoever did it kept them. But is there any guidance documents that tell us what kinds of documents
Yes.
would be accumulated?
Moved it so it's staring at the roof. You know,
In the Seneschal's handbook, it does state that, you know, you should maintain waivers, and you need to maintain waivers for fighters of a list or for non-members, those
Okay,
things.
but as I said, I've never had anyone from Goliath run the list, and I've never had them come back to me. I think they're being taken by someone else. Do I need to get them from them?
I've done some lists for Goliath in years past, and yeah, outside of the fact I've never was told who would want them, you know, then I just keep them in my records and I can pull them out then.
And
if
that's a common problem in the kingdom, is we haven't had good officer training. I don't feel, and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't feel like we've gone through some of that very basic stuff. So yes, in this case, you know, you hold an event, you need to have the waivers from Troll and from the lists. As the Seneschal, you should make sure those are scanned and sent into the Kingdom Waiver Deputy. And prior to having a Kingdom Waiver Deputy, we were supposed to keep those waivers in files. which is
So-
why some of us have boxes and boxes of.
There is a strong suspicion that my treasurer has all of those. And I've never like gone through all the boxes of files she has. So
Well,
that could be where they are. But as far as what I have access to, what I, in the storage shed, I have none of that stuff.
and so the deal is it's tough. A lot of us have not necessarily, a lot of rules have been kind of overlooked and we haven't necessarily been doing things by the handbook. But moving forward, now that folks are hopefully aware of this, we can keep those records when we start having events.
Yeah, the exchequer should always give the waivers to the Seneschal. That should be a normal thing that happens after an event.
And then
So
there's
I
a
would-
given period. I think you have 10 days, is it? I can't recall the period.
Something like
In
that.
the handbook.
I would expect that if you had an event as opposed to a practice or something like that, that you should have all of the event paperwork together. So you would have your waivers and your financials, all the things that the exchequer is going to give to you, and they would probably be attached to each other, labeled under that particular event. So you probably have you probably have a box somewhere that has event paperwork in it that is going to have those waiver forms attached to it.
Okay.
Unless
that is
somebody has a
probably-
filing system where they put all of the waiver forms together.
Yeah,
you may
that's
or may
probably
not.
in the possession of the treasurer then. I've never seen it.
Right. And so just to be aware, when we start having events, try to make sure to keep track of your waivers. Additionally, when you're having practices, your night marshal should be sending in waivers to you, and you should be sending those on to the Kingdom Waiver Deputy. Now, whether they do that digitally, I don't care.
So that's one of our weird things. We don't do practices under the SCA. We do them as a student club and it's all covered by the school. So we don't do any of the SCA paperwork. And that's just the way it's always been. Because we're covered under the state. We have the rules we follow from them. They cover the insurance.
Right.
And so we don't do it as SCA.
And if you don't do it as SCA, you don't do it as SCA, and you don't go by SCA rules. If you're not having waivers signed and you're not an official SCA event, then you're not an SCA event. That's a distinct difference.
Right. So we do, but we bring night marshals in. We have official SCA people there running it. It's always been a strange situation for us because the school doesn't like the corporate side of the club, and we like to work with the school because it's really convenient. I mentioned we have no contracts. We don't need contracts. We just write our name down and say we're going to use this building on that day, and it's done.
Right. No, I was president or seneschal of a student group, and that was the nice thing. However, when we did our events, because we advertised them as on SCA web pages, if we had a fighter practice, we would have folks fill out the waivers and we would send them in.
Yeah, we do that for feast day. And I'm guessing that Amy has them, the treasurer.
Right.
Because
So
I've never seen them.
So if she has them, and if you can get those into Diana, and they're younger than 7 years, that would be great. Moving forward, let's make sure we keep our waivers. Let our other officers know that we are interested in the waivers and we want copies of them.
How would the waiver issue work for a Kingdom event like Battlemore or Kingdom ANS, that type of stuff?
The autocrat involved would forward those to the main autocrat of the event, and that autocrat is responsible for getting them to the kingdom or to Kingdom.
Okay, because I got to thinking about that because it's not always in the same place sometimes, and
that's why having a waiver secretary is so important.
Yeah,
it really, we haven't had them for a long time, and I have a funny feeling we've lost a lot of waivers.
Well,
Probably.
and I would say it would be helpful to have, because I haven't seen a Outlands Autocrat expectations guide. Here's the paperwork that you need to have turned in kind of thing.
Mhm.
I know Dragonspine especially is run by the grants and below. We do have peers, but for the most part, our peers are, they don't necessarily play in the local group as much.
No.
So we have a lot of new folks just getting things done without necessarily the handoff of, of what it should be. I ran my first several events and never, and I assume I think I did most things right, but I never actually had any kind of guidance in what that looked like.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I know various groups are at various stages. Some groups like Alberon have a whole handbook for autocrats. Awesome, Alberon, you're way ahead. Some of the groups have nothing. Some of the groups, Driggistan has a little checklist we put together. I feel like at the kingdom level, if you folks are okay with it, I'm really kind of feeling like we need to have a very basic checklist available so that we have that basic information for autocrats at all levels. And that I just put that on my, let's hope I can get this done to-do list.
I think that's a great idea.
Yes, because the local group can always exceed that, but if there's no framework in terms of, especially now with social media and I'm looking at the event that was created for Dragonspine's event in March, what was posted in that event isn't matching what was done under the last social media officer.
Right. Yes.
And there's a lot of minutia that goes into the social media aspect with events now, that has caused some Sturm und Drang, and having those kind of basic guidelines. I've been Seneschal for 2 years and I had no idea that I was the one responsible for getting those waivers to Kingdom. So
yes, well, and that's why, okay, so we only have an hour and a half today, which is by no means even the tiniest, or 2 hours? 2 hours. We only have 2 hours today, which is still by no means enough time to go through everything that the Seneschal needs to do. So to that effect, when I was Southern Kingdom Deputy, we started having monthly meetings. And at those meetings, we just have a check-in and discussion. Partially, it was just to kind of help folks deal with COVID. But really, my goal and dream and aspiration is that is a place where you can go and ask questions. And additionally, I would like to see, short trainings, a little bit of training. This month, we're going to talk about waivers. Next month, we're going to talk about financial policy and what Seneschals need to know, because let's face it, we've got some problems. How to deal with cantankerous people, diversity and inclusions. You guys, the sky's the limit. I really feel like, please let me know what you guys want to learn. And my goal is to get that training out to you. It's going to be slow. It's going to take a while because, let's face it, this is a volunteer organization. And I only have so much time. My deputies only do, but I did bring on a really great Northern and Southern deputy and Baroness Diana as well. She's my special projects deputy, and we're gonna really try to get some of the training out to folks.
Yeah, if you're not on the Teams group, let one of us in the thing know. So
okay, so before we get any further and I get sidetracked, the Southern folks are all on this team. I don't know if the Northern folks are on this team, but
I am not.
Okay, we created a Teams website.
I have a Linux machine and it looks at your Microsoft stuff and goes bleep.
Well, unfortunately, I don't know how to help you there.
I know.
Can you use your phone? Because the phone apps do work also.
I can, but I have limited bandwidth and data.
So
Okay.
Google Chrome will probably do Teams pretty well for you. I use Linux as well.
Okay, I have not been able to figure out how to make it use the Google Teams. If you can message me and let me
Yes,
know how
if
to,
you guys
that would
can
be
talk,
wonderful.
that would be great because Linux is way beyond my
Yeah, so
realm of knowledge.
I've never gone to the Teams because I'm busy at the times you have those meetings.
Right.
But I think I've used Teams in Chrome and I think it does work, but I haven't done it in a while.
Well, if you have any issues, and you can't make the meetings, seriously feel free to contact us as well. I'm available weekdays after 5 till 9, because let's face it, I have to work early in the morning. And I'm available on Saturdays from 9 to 9.
Okay, because at the moment I haven't gotten any notice for any meetings because I sort of tried to get my phone hooked up and such, but I'm getting zero.
Yeah, but I have to admit, the Northern deputy just started. Was it last month? And I don't know that they've had time to get this together. This has been something I started as Southern deputy, and I'm hoping people like it and want to carry it forward.
Okay.
So let me show you what's on our team site, because really, we probably ought to have this on the Kingdom website, and I think we probably have most of this information there, but it's harder to find and see and read, I think. Let me pull up Teams before I do anything, and then I'll share the screen. Is this the break time? Do we need a 15-minute break for people to get up and stretch and use the restroom or whatnot?
I wouldn't mind that.
Okay, 15-minute break.
Maybe not. Do you want to do 15 or do you want to do a little shorter?
Oh, sorry, this doesn't work. We can do 10 if you guys like. I'm just used to 15 because that's what we do at work.
Do we want to stop recording?
Playing video games.
Yes, please stop recording and we'll take a 5-minute break or 10-minute break.